Hi guys, and welcome back to another video here on David's PC channel. Today I want to show you guys how you can create the tree you can see in front of you right here. And basically we're going to be using a tool called Arbaro, which is an extremely helpful tool to create trees, bushes, and other types of plants and vegetation, which you can then export and use in Blender. And this is just a quick render of that. Just to show you guys a quick example of how you can also use Arbaro trees and bushes would be this scene. I'm still working on it. There's no materials, as you can see. I can't really do those on my laptop. So basically this is just an example, and I will also be doing a complete tutorial series on this courtyard scene. Now, basically what you have to do to create the tree you can see here is download Arbaro, and I will have a link for that in the description below. And what you will see after that is you will see, once you extract it, you will see a folder like this. What you do is you just open Arbaro, the executable jar file. You need Java to run this, and I already opened the window, so just double click that and you'll get to the Arbaro software. And basically Arbaro, just a quick thing about the user interface for Arbaro, you have the main screen right here, and you can change the view or the angle all 360 degrees all the way around it with the lever down here. Then you have a top view in the top right hand corner, and you have a little schematic of the settings you're able to change in the bottom right hand corner. And you will see that as we go to different settings, a different picture will show up here. Now, the actual way you're going to be creating your tree, or the tree, relatively similar to this one here, is we're going to be using the different levels on the left hand side right here, and they're all expandable. So once you expand them all, there are different levels, and all the level 0, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3, they have the exact same settings: length and taper, curvature, splitting, and branching, while the general settings appear individual. So basically I'm going to guide you through each one of the settings. I'm going to tell you what they do exactly and how we're going to use them to create our tree. So basically we're just going to start off with tree shape, the first section of the generals tab, and you can refer to a little image in the bottom right hand corner if you like. I'm going to walk you through what each says. So as for species, you can just give it a name. It'll be used when you import or export the file. Let's just call this tutorial. And I'm well aware that tutorial is probably not a very true tree species, but you know, that's fine. As for shape, there are all these default shapes, but I'm actually going to show you how to create your own shape. So just hit envelope, and you'll then be able to change your tree shape. As for levels, we're going to actually use 4 levels. So the first level is the trunk, then there's 3 branch levels, and the leaves will always be located on the outermost level. So in this case, the leaves will be located on the 4th level. I just like to use 3 or 4 levels, and then for some trees you have to use less just to get them accurately. Scale is basically how tall the tree is in meters. You can also always get a small description down here. So you'll see that it says average tree size in meters. If you click down here, it will actually tell you more detail about the individual setting. So you can always check that out yourself. As for scale variation, if you can see just the variation, let's just set this to 0.1, so we create a slight bit more variation, which the software does for you. Base size is the distance from the floor to the first branch. I just set this to 0.3, so there's a little bit more of a gap. Then base splits, we're not going to use for this, which basically splits the trunk. We don't want that, we just want a single trunk tree. Ratio power up basically defines how thin or thick the branches are in correlation to the previous branch, in this case the trunk. Let's actually set this to 1.5, so we get slightly thinner branches. And then attraction up defines how strong the upwards growth tendency of the tree is. And that's funny, I said exactly that. I didn't even look. So we're going to leave this at default. Setting it higher, we'll have them grow upwards. Setting them to negative, or setting this to negative value, we'll have them grow downwards. So basically that's it for this first part. Let's go to trunk radius. So again, you can see the drawing changed a little bit. Trunk radius, the ratio, we're going to set to 0.2, which will create a thinner stem. Then also flare is basically the broadening of the stem towards the bottom. We're going to actually make this slightly larger at 0.7. And then lobes is basically, you can kind of imagine it as extremely large trees where the roots partially come out of the earth and create a uneven kind of base of the stem. I'm going to show this to you. Watch the top right hand corner. We're going to set the lobes to 5 and then the lobe depth to 1, and you'll see, actually let's set this to 0.5 for all intents and purposes. You can see, okay, never mind, that was wrong. This should be set to 0.5. So basically now you can see that it's kind of like a star shape, and these parts here would be the ones sticking out. These ones would be the ones that are coming in. So it's kind of like the roots coming out of the soil. But we're going to set the lobe depth way down to 0.05, just so that there's a slight tendency, or you can just slightly see that. And then zero scale, or just scale and scale variation, we're not going to use at all. They basically just kind of give the tree, or it's another value to create the trunk radius and the size of that. So we're just going to leave that as is. Now moving on to the next section of leaves. Basically, you can still play around with this later once you get into more detail, but for now, let's just set it to about 9 leaves per branch. Then the leaf shape, I usually like to go for a disc 5, which is basically one, which is just, it defines how many vertices there are. But since we're going to have lots of leaves, let's go for disc 4, just to save that one extra vertice. Because once you start having thousands and many more thousands of leaves, then you're going to start running into some calculating problems in Blender. It'll just lag a lot. Leaf scale is basically the size of the leaves. I just set this to 0.25 to make them slightly larger. Leaf scale X is basically just the ratio of the width. So setting this to 1 would mean that each leaf is as wide as long, but we're going to set this to about 0.4, so just slightly longer than 50-50. Then the leaf bend, in addition to what we had here in the tree shape, the attraction up. In addition to that, the leaf bend defines how strong the leaves themselves are pointed upwards towards the sun, towards the light. But you can't really set a light source, so it just means upwards. We're going to just leave that at default. And the leaf stem length is basically, you have a branch and each leaf has kind of like a stem, and they don't show up at all, so it's just kind of like an air gap, which is why I like to set this to about 0.2, so you can still see that there's a gap, but it's not quite so significant, so that should be fine. And then the leaf distribution, basically, in this case, it's actually handy, just click here. So 0 means that all the leaves, or most leaves, are on the outside, while high value, so 8, which is the maximum, would mean they're all on the inside. So if you set this to 0, you'll see that all the leaves are scattered around the edges here. So we're going to set this to about 2. So we have most leaves on the outside and some leaves on the inside. 3 would be completely equal distribution. And now, since for tree shape, we chose envelope, in pruning, we're now able to change these settings. But in order to do that, let's quickly just go through the settings a little bit more, because we're going to have to change some things for this to really be able to show up properly. So as for quality, just leave this at default. You can change the smoothing and the leaf quality. That's just fine for now. Now, moving on to level 0, so the trunk, you'll see that these 4 settings, like I mentioned before, repeat over. So for now, length is just, if you set this to 2, it would be double the length you entered in your generals. So we're just going to leave this at default. Length variation, we're going to leave at default as well. But the taper, we're going to set to 1.1, which creates a slightly rounded off edge or point. You can actually refer to the image in the bottom right hand corner where you have all the examples, something like 0.5 would actually create kind of like a bobbly spherical kind of taper. So let's just leave it at 1.1 for now. Moving on to curvature. Curving basically just defines how the stem curves. So we're going to set the curve resolution all the way up to 16 to get just much more detail. It's kind of like subdivision surface modifier in Blender. Now, basically the curving is all in degrees, and if you enter a positive number, it will bend downwards, and negative number will bend it the other direction. So if we do 90 degrees here, and then for curve back we do minus 90 degrees, and we just change the view, you'll see we get something like this. But of course we don't want that much, so we're just going to set this to about 10 degrees, and this to about minus 20 degrees, or just enter 20 because the minus is already registered. And then the curve V is just the variation. We're going to set this to 50, which basically just gives it another kind of like a more dimensional kind of curvature. Actually, I'm going to set this down to 10 and this one up to 5. We don't want that much of a curve, and we're actually going to set this down a little bit more as well. Now you can see that the stem has a slight curve. Set this down a little bit more, maybe even 2. Just we don't want to go overkill on the stem curvature. Okay, so now that we have done the curvature, we're going to go into splitting, but we're actually not going to use this at all. Basically, this would just split at the segments. So just split, we're going to completely go past splitting for all of the levels actually, and go to branching. And now basically for branching for the trunk, you want to leave all of that at default pretty much. And so I'm going to show you guys each setting in the next level. So once we get into level 1, you'll see that level 1 is actually the first set of branches, level 2 would be the second, and so on. And just doing the same thing again, we're going to leave the length at 0.5 and move the taper to 1.1, just leave the variation at 0, just so we get the little rounded tip again. Then curvature. I'm going to notch, put this up to 6 or so, and now we really have to quickly work on the pruning, so getting our shape right. But for now, let's just leave this at maybe minus 10 degrees, so an upwards kind of thingy, kind of bend. Then leave this at minus 15 degrees, and then just curve variation, just set it to maybe 20 degrees, so it does its own little thing. Splitting again, we're going to skip, and we're going to go into branching. And after we finish this setting, we can go back and change the shape of our tree. So basically in branching, you have the down angle, which determines how inclined the branches are. So setting this to 90 would mean that all branches go out horizontally. And then down angle variation would just be the variation of that. If we set this to 90, they would go all over the place. But what we want to do now basically is if you set this to a negative value, it will mean that the lower the branches are, the lower down they bend. So if you set this to about negative 50 and set this down to another 50 or so, you'll see in the top the branches go nearly straight up, while in the bottom they go out quite horizontally. And actually we want to set this value slightly lower, and maybe set this to 60. So now it's pretty much the same thing, just with slightly different values. Rotate basically means, if we look at the top now, that the rotation between each branch in that sense is 120 degrees. And now since the tree doesn't really work that way, we want to set it to something more random. And a good value I like to use is 135 degrees and then a variation of 30 degrees to just get a relatively random distribution. Now it doesn't really look random right now, but as soon as we add some more branches, we're actually going to go up to 70 branches. You'll see that the distribution is much more random. Now in the branch distribution basically means if I put this down to 0, all the branches will come out of the stem segments. So we're just going to leave this at 1 so it's spread out evenly. And now once we have these many branches, we can now really start shaping the tree. So we're going to go back to our pruning envelope, and we're going to start by setting this to 1. So things are going to start to take shape. Now prune width. And now it's really nice to refer to the bottom, to this picture here, is the width of the tree. We're going to set this to 0.4. And if we actually look at our reference image, we can see that it's quite a tall tree in that sense. So what we can actually also do to aid that a little bit is go to our trunk and make this 1.5, so it's actually slightly taller as a tree, and that really messes that up. Okay, let's actually undo that. It shouldn't really do that, and just do the editing here. So what we can do is we can make it slightly larger, so we can get that longer. Maybe set this just to 15 meters, not 105, 15 meters. And so that way, when we go to our pruning again, we can just make this smaller at maybe 0.35. So just it changes the width. Now the prune width peak, and again here you can see this is the distance from the base of the branches to here. In this case, this is kind of half, and 0.5 just means that the distance is equal. If we set this to 0.4, you'll see that it kind of moves down a little bit. Now the prune power low is, you can see here, it's the curvature from I'm going to refer to the schematic from the middle line to the base of the stem, and prune power high is the same from the top. Any value lower than 1 will create kind of an outwards curvature. Less than 1, more than 1 will create an inwards curvature. So if I set this to 2, you'll see that it really just creates that. But we want to set it at maybe 0.2, so it creates a very smooth bottom, kind of round. Maybe set this to 0.4 to kind of get a smoother or more round top. And now this, going back to our reference image, you can see that it seems like a very lengthy, in that sense, tree, and that we're going to get by changing the curvature, or basically making the branches slightly steeper. So we're going to go back to our branching here for the first level. We're just going to make this less, maybe like this, maybe even some less, -20, and that looks quite a lot better. We're actually going to, this is really a matter of just playing around. We're going to change the base size to 0.2. Yeah, I think we can be happy with that. So let's move on to the next branch level. So for here, we're going to just leave the length again. We're going to set the taper to 1.1 again, so we have a slightly rounded off tip. And for curvature, we're going to be basically repeating the same step. Set the resolution to 5, curve it maybe -5, set this to 20 degrees in variation, and -10 in curvature back. Again, skip splitting. For the down angle here, maybe let's go for 50, -30. Okay, we have to reduce that. Maybe go for, yeah, I think this looks about good. As for the upwards kind of growth. As for the rotate, we're going to use the same values as before, 135 and 30. So we kind of get a little bit more randomness in there. And for branches, we're going to set this up to 25, maybe 20. 20 should be fine. So we have quite a lot of branches here. And now we're going to be moving to the last level, and we're going to also see the leaves on the branches already. And the first thing we want to do is to want to set the length slightly up, so that basically kind of they are slightly longer in proportion. Again, we're going to set them to 1.1 for the rounded off edges. Curvature, we're going to set to 3 because you want to keep this as low as you can without getting kind of like edges. Again, -5. Maybe set this to 10 this time, and again go for -5. Just that these are slightly rounded or curved. Skip splitting and go to branching. And basically now we can just leave this at quite default. Maybe even set this to only -5. Should be fine. Again, let's go for the 135 and 30 value. And for branches, let's actually hit it up at maybe 7. So we just get those couple more branches. And really, sadly, there's not like a view the entire tree feature in Arbaro. So what you're going to have to do is actually export the file and then import it back into Blender to see how the tree looks. So we're going to do that now, and we're possibly even going to do some changes or make some changes to the tree if we're not quite happy how it looks. So the way to export it is to go here to create and export the tree. And you want to make sure that you hit wavefront OBJ. Just hit UV coordinates for stem and for leaves, which is going to enable you to create quite realistic materials, but I'm not going to cover this in this tutorial. What you want to do is you want to choose a directory where you're going to find it again, this tutorial. And I already filmed this tutorial once before, but it ended up being quite long, so I'm going to try to cut it shorter this time. Call it tree. Make sure you put OBJ somewhere in the name because it's hard to distinguish the files besides their file size. And just start off with 0, 3. Save that, or just hit enter, and now it's going to kind of like calculate this, so hit start and give it a second. So basically the OBJ file format is one you can directly import to Blender, and I'm just going to tell you a little bit about this while it's creating the tree. And the files can get quite large. You know, this might be about 25 megabytes or so importing will take quite a while as well. Okay, so looks like we're done. So let's go to our Blender. Yeah, hit File, then Import, and choose wavefront.obj. Go to the folder, and you have to hit this Enable Filtering of Files, so you can actually see these files. You want to go for a tree obj 03, and you see that it says 0B for bytes. It's actually not 0 bytes. For some reason, it doesn't quite find the right file size. So even if it does say that it doesn't have a size at all, just import it anyways. Like I said before, this is gonna basically Windows is gonna assume that Blender is crashing and not responding, and you can see that. You get the little wait wheel, and all you have to do is wait. Don't click anything because then actually Blender can crash. But right now it's just importing the file, so just give it a second. Okay, we're back, and everything is very laggy. I hope you can see that. But our tree has been created. And now what we can kind of see that maybe we actually want some more branches here on the outside, that it's kind of like light, and that the stem is a little bit thick. So I usually do this many iterations going back into Arbaro. So let's actually go to chunk radius, set this to 1.5, actually even to 1, to get that thinner stem. And now the branches have become thinner as well. So we can actually set this down to 1.25, the ratio up, or the ratio power, which changes the thickness of the stems. And we're actually going to go to our level first, the first branching, which you can see right here. And from 70, just hit that up to maybe 85. We're just going to create a couple more branches, which should fill in. We're actually maybe even going to set this to 10 leaves, because at the end of the day, it's the leaves that make the filling impression. We're not going to make any more branches on this level, but we are going to maybe make this 8 branches for the final level. Yeah, pretty much that should be it. I'm going to export the tree, import it back into Blender, and show you guys the difference. But hold on a second, because I don't want to have to make you watch that part. So I'm going to be back in a second. Okay, I'm back, and I've imported both the trees. On the right hand side is the old one, left hand side the new one with the thinner stem, and it does kind of make it look a little bit bigger, and then also it seems to have more volume, especially if we go into perspective and not wireframe mode. Not kind of moving around, and it's very laggy, as you can probably see. That's just simply because the machine is not the fastest. You know, I'm on my laptop, and also we have altogether 550,000 vertices, or faces, sorry. Yeah, it's gonna make it very slow, but basically I'm happy with the tree. So what we're gonna quickly do is go into Arbaro, hit File and Save As. Go to the same folder, go grab the file name, and instead of OBJ, just type Arbaro. You know, of course, you don't have to save them the exact same way as I do, but this makes or this shows me that I can really truly get the same file in the same connect the same object with the same Arbaro file. It took me a second to say, so just save that. And just to quickly show you guys, I closed Arbaro. I'm going to start Arbaro back up. You know, just getting the window about to the recording space. If you want to open it, just hit open file and find that file, Tree Arbaro or 04, hit open, because if you try to double click on that file in your Windows Explorer or Finder if you have a Mac, it's not going to open it with the correct program, so you have to open it this way. Closing that and going back into Blender, let's quickly get rid of this tree with just the box select tool. And since we're good with this tree, let's actually move it to our second layer, so that on our first layer we can set up our camera. And just for the quick render, let's get rid of the timeline. Oopsie, get rid of the timeline, add our camera, and actually this is a shortcut I haven't showed you guys. With Alt R you can undo all the rotations, so basically now we're just back to our basic kind of the original rotation. And what we first want to do also is from the resolution, which is 1920 by 1080, flip that around to 1080, from 1080 to, or from 1920 to and 1080 to the other way around, so we get a height format like this. Rotate it on the x-axis 90 degrees, move it back on the y, and let's get the tree back and just make sure we have the entire tree on it. Move the camera up a little bit, move the view down. Okay, so that's it for the view. Now we want to just create the backdrop, and if we quickly go back to our reference, you can see it's just kind of like a one big smooth area. And the way you get that is by, let's get rid of the tree quickly, just add a plane, go into like an orthographic side view like this. Actually quickly just scale that up like so. Grab the back vertices, go into the side view, and now just extrude them one little bit at a time to create a truly smooth kind of curvature. Just hitting the E for extrude and then just moving the mouse. You can still see the top, which is not good. Actually, we're gonna have to change this quickly. C, by the way, is the circle select tool, which I'm using right now. Shut up, phone. Yeah, okay. So then just with everything, or go into edit mode, select everything, hit W to get specials, subdivide smooth, so you have a smoother backdrop. Hit smooth shading, go into the camera and actually scale it on the x-axis to make sure everything's on it, and apparently scale it in the z-axis up, so we get that. Okay, and so now we have the backdrop. We can get our tree back, and we quickly just want to move the backdrop, with the tree, want to move the backdrop up on the z-axis just a little bit, so the bottom of the tree gets hidden, so that if we go to the bottom now like this, we should, in theory, okay, we have to move it up some more, we should see the bottom of the tree. That's what we want to see. Okay, so for materials, the materials are extremely basic. Actually, before we add materials, we have to add the light source. Let's only go to the first one just so there's not a whole lot of lag. Just add a plane, move it up. Did I add a plane now? I might have. No, I haven't. Add a plane, move that up the z-axis, scale it up like so, move it on the y-axis, rotate it on the x-axis, just so it's kind of like behind the camera. Maybe move it down a little bit more. Get our tree back. Oops. Get our tree back like so. And now we can add materials. This is the backdrop, so just go to the Materials tab, add a new material, call it Backdrop. And if you are noticing that I'm kind of going over this quite quickly, that's because I am. For diffuse, the color, and I'm getting the stupid lag thingy again, so that it keeps hiding it. Basically, you just want to set it to a slightly darker value like this. And that's it. Then for the light, which, oopsie, the light, which if I scroll back here, I can see up here. Give it another new material, call it light. From the drop down menu, hit emission, keep the rest on default, and then now let's actually just only select the tree, grab the trunk, and you can see that it actually added materials from the OBJ file. Just hit the minus to get rid of them, hit a new one, call it clay, and I usually like to add some glossy, so mix it, but we're not going to do that because it will eat up render time with so many vertices. So what you want to do is just, it's doing it again. Okay, just grab gray, maybe like this, make sure it's lighter than the backdrop. And then the way you can give all the other, or the entire tree, the same material is you select everything and make sure that you have the object with the material you want on all of them in the bright yellow, so the primary object. Hit Control L and you'll get the little menu, make links. You hit materials, and then if you just hit one of these objects, you'll see that it has the clay material. So let's get back our first render scene, deselect everything, and hit render. And I'm gonna render this out, and I'll be back when it's done. And that was pretty much it. So I showed you guys how to create a tree and put it in here, and this is actually an extremely good technique, especially the backdrop if you just want to test render an object. But I'm going to stop talking, render it. I'll be back when it's done. Okay guys, so the render has completed, and it is rendered it took about 24 minutes. And I thought I should mention this, that I rendered it at the default settings, so 50 samples, not 100 like I usually do. You can kind of see a little bit of noise that would usually get eliminated, and you know, the resolution is all of what we set. The light rays was just the default, which I believe is, you know, similar to direct light. And pretty much you can see that there's still a couple of branches showing, so maybe increase the leaf size a little bit for your next tree. And render only shows this. In the viewport you wouldn't really see the branches or these little gaps in the leaves here, so maybe even increasing the branch count a little bit. But I actually like this tree much more than the reference. You know, you get some kind of messy leaves up here and all of that, so you know, this tree is kind of tidier in that sense, I think. So you know, pretty much this covers this tutorial. I showed you guys how to use Arbaro to create a tree and then render it in Blender. And I hope you guys can use the knowledge for your own projects. And we're going to be using Arbaro in the upcoming tutorial series on the courtyard scene, of which I showed an image previously. I hope you guys liked the video, and stay tuned for more content. Like, favorite, subscribe, and so on. If you know you're looking forward to future tutorials or other content on David's PC channel. Thank you guys for watching. Take care.